So welcome back to my channel. Recently we've had some really strong winds in the UK, and trying to get the camera balanced on the tripod on the edge of a cliff while using filters, it was just a no-go situation. It was just way too windy. So I did a little experiment where I basically put the camera into high burst mode, set the shot up as if I was taking it by hand, and then took about 20 or so shots in quick succession. And then I've put them into Photoshop and used a technique on there to blend them together. So it gives the effect of having a long exposure, and obviously it's not going to completely replicate the niceties of having filters on the camera. But if you find yourself in that position where you just can't get the tripod stable with the filters on, then this is maybe a technique that you can use. So what I'm going to show you in this video is how I edited those photos and how I came to the end result of the photo that I've just showed you. So if it's something you're interested in, then follow along, and maybe it might be useful for you in the future. So this is basically the image that I took, which is at Freshwater Bay on the Isle of Wight. As you can see there, it's quite a windy day, and I did have the tripod set up on the side of the cliff here, and the gusts of wind that were coming through just kept moving it all the time, so there's just no chance of doing a long exposure shot. I've imported the images that I took from Freshwater Bay on the Isle of Wight on this very windy day. I've imported each of the photos into Lightroom, and I haven't really made much adjustments. The exposure was probably a little bit too much, so I've just brought that down, and then using the copy and paste feature, I've duplicated that right across the images that I wanted to use. Now, as I say, I got around about 20 or so images there. So the first thing I'm going to do then to create this, and obviously if you need to adjust your images on there, just adjust one and then copy and paste those settings so each image is exactly the same. As we select, using the shift and the mouse button, we select the images selected. So once the images are selected there, we're going to right click and go up to edit in, and then we're going to come down to open layers in Photoshop. Now what this does, rather than open up individual images in their own file, it's going to open all the images up under one file, which then enables us to make the changes to each one and merge them together. And this may take a little bit of time to open up depending on the speed of your computer. So we'll action this now, and then Photoshop will go in and then load that up for you. If it takes a bit of time, just let the computer do its work, it will get there eventually. So we've got all our images open in Photoshop now, and down on the right hand side here you can see that it's loaded all the images as layers down on this file. So the first thing we're going to do is auto align these images, so basically each image is overlaid and correctly aligned with the one beneath it. I shot these handheld, so if you've got a steady hand you can do it. If not, you could always put your camera on a tripod, because that very small movement that you get if you're holding it down for the burst shots is going to work also quite nicely. Now, it may crop in a little bit, so if you're framing a shot up you might want to allow just a little bit of extra room around the outside. So the first thing we're going to do then is select the layers on this. So we're going to come and hold the shift key down on a PC, we're going to select the first one, and then we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom of the layers and select that one so they're all selected. Now, as I say, we need to auto align these, so we're going to come up to the edit tab, come down to come down to auto align layers, and then just choose auto and select OK. That's going to whiz away. That's quite a big processing for it, because it's going to go through each image and basically align them on top of each other so that all the points line up inside there. So as you can see, it's going to take a little while just to work through. So I'll forward the video on just until it's done, and then we can look at the next stage of doing this. While this is chugging away, I also tried this technique out on the Sony RX Mark 7, which is just a portable compact camera. That's got a really good burst mode on that as well. And this image that I'm showing you now was done exactly the same. The camera was handheld with the fast burst on there, and you're using this technique managed to give this real long exposure look to it. So it doesn't really matter what camera you do it on. If you use a technique, you've got a steady hand, you should get some nice end results out of doing this. Okay, so that's finished processing now. And if we look at the image on here, you can see that there's a little bit of opaqueness around the outside, so that's obviously where the camera moves slightly, and it's overlaid the images on there. We've got a little bit, that's why I said just allow yourself a little bit extra on the framing of it, so don't cut it too tight in on there. But as you see, it's only very marginal on there. Okay, so while we've got these layers selected now, they've been aligned, we're going to come up to the layer tab, and we're going to come down to Smart Object, and we're going to say Convert to Smart Object. Now what this is going to do, it's going to chug away again and basically compress all those layers that are aligned into one file, so then we can then run the average tool over it in Photoshop, which will give it that blurred effect. So basically what it's going to be doing is anything that's constant in the frame, it's going to leave constant, so the rock in the middle and the hills at the back, whereas all the water or clouds, not in this case, but if clouds are moving, it's going to average those out between the movements on there. And this is pretty much the same as what you're doing using long exposure photography with a filter and opening the shutter for any length of time. Okay, so we've got the file down here, which is the smart file on there. So basically it puts all the layers under that one layer image on there. So this is basically what we're left with once we've converted to a smart object, is this one layer down here. Now what we can do with that, if we come up to the layer tab and then we come down to smart object and then we look for the option that says stack mode, we've got the options of what we can do with those layers that are now basically inside of that smart object. So in this case what we're going to do is we're going to select medium, and then what this is going to do is going to, again, a little bit of a slow process because it's going to run through, and as I said earlier, it's going to blend all of those layers together, keeping the items that are constant will remain the same, but anything that's got movement in it, it's going to give it a blurry effect. So we'll click on that, and as you can see, that's going to run off, and it says rendering image stack medium. So once this finishes, we're going to be left with that photo looking like it's come from a long exposure, and we still need to do a little bit of work to it, so we're going to have to crop out the side so we've got the image that we want on there, and it just also takes out any where the overlaps are on the outside. So there we go, so that's just finished now, and as you can see, the rocks, the cliffs and everything else is still quite crisp, and if we just zoom in on that, you can see that that rock is still really, really crisp and sharp on there. If we come up to the cliffs, you can see that that has, but all the water on there has been blended. So you can see it gives a really nice effect. Now, as you can see, the horizon line is not quite like there. We'd obviously have a bit of a tide running to the left here, and the water would quickly disappear. So we're going to save this, take it back into Lightroom, and then we're going to make our adjustments on there to bring that image back to how we'd like it. And obviously you can, if you want to, make the adjustments in Photoshop and export it from that way. Just for this one, I'm going to export it back into Lightroom. So we just literally do File, and then we're going to hit Save, and that's going to save that on there. And then we'll skip back over to Lightroom now, and we'll make those adjustments to see if we can get that image looking as good as a long exposure shot. Okay, so the photo's come back up into Lightroom now. So the first thing I'm going to do to this is basically crop the image, because down here on the left, as you can see, we've got a little bit where it hasn't quite lined up. So that didn't get brought into the merge effect that we put onto it, and also the horizon line, which is out of kilter. So we're just going to come up to use the crop tool. First thing I'm going to do is just straighten that horizon on there, and then just click done, and you can still see we've got a little bit left on there, so we're just going to crop that in very slightly. And obviously this is all down to personal preference on how you set this up. So that's looking a little bit better already, and then we're just going to come back in and adjust the basics. I always tend to bring the highlights all the way down, just lift the shadows a little bit, and then holding the Alt key down on the white balance, I'll just bring it into those, just start to blink so that I know that I've got the most out of the actual photo. We can increase the texture a little bit on there, a little bit on the contrast maybe, and then just bring down the exposure very slightly. We'll increase the vibrance on there, maybe a bit on the saturation. Bring up the highlights and bring down the lowlights a little bit. And just bring the shadows to there. And then you can adjust using your colour tab here. So you basically can do this as you will. I'm not going to spend too long going through this. As I say, you've got the option of doing lots of stuff in Lightroom to get that image up to scratch. Even on the rock here, you can use the circular tool just to highlight here, for instance. I'll just reset that back. And if you find that rock's a little bit too dark, in this case, we could just lift the shadows maybe a fraction on there, and the whites, and maybe up on the cliff as well, but you get the idea. Hopefully you'll see that that gives quite a nice effect on there. It's never going to be quite as good as doing it with an actual tripod and an ND filter, and maybe grants if you're using those as well. But on here you can see this was the final image that I came to after doing all the edits on it. And it does give quite a nice effect, and as you can see, if we zoom in onto that file, it still maintains some really nice features. Some really nice detail on here, and even on the cliffs at the back into the distance, but it does give the sea that movement on there. So just a quick tutorial on how to do that. I hope you found it useful. Click subscribe to the channel, and I'll do some more videos soon. So thanks for watching. Hope it's been useful, as I say, and I'll catch you up in the next one. So take care.